The whole system is not served by misguided do-gooderism, or the large noblesse oblige is an insulting attitude to take, because, the real nature of the human condition is that we're all in it together. This is one of the reasons why I am so hostile to all forms of spiritual hierarchy. I have never seen a truly superior person, I don't believe. And if I have, they were so humble and self-effacing that they never would have claimed that superiority as their own. If somebody tells you they're a superior person, my God, they're automatically to be taken off the active list. That alone screws the pooch right there. And it's tremendously disempowering. The mushroom said to me once, and I've said it to many of you many times, it said, if for one human being to seek enlightenment from another is like a grain of sand on the beach seeking enlightenment from another. Don't you get it? It's the same flesh. It's the same flesh. Nobody knows anything you don't know, and even if they do, it's not your knowledge, so what good is it doing you? The idea that it's okay for you not to understand mathematics or not to play the violin because somebody else does it very well is a complete cop-out. You will be held responsible for what you know and what you can do. And using the excuse that you lived in the same world with Jascha Heifetz is not going to get you off the hook of not knowing how to play the violin. I say this as someone who does not play the violin. It's fun to take responsibility. It's fun to test the waters. The hardest thing to put across to oneself and to other people is that the universe is a more friendly place than we have been told. Paranoia, culture is institutionalized paranoia. And it's very hard to decondition oneself from this. No matter how deconditioned you may think you are, there is more and more work to be done. And I think the essence of Taoism and why its roots in nature are so powerful is because what Taoism is saying is, if you will quiet your mind and if you will pay attention, you will discover that you are supported and cared for by the dynamic of the universe. This should be obvious by virtue of the fact that you're even alive. I mean, how unlikely is your existence? I put it to you, pretty unlikely. And yet, here you are. Well, do you just think it was the greatest series of well-rolled dice in history? That's silly. That's ridiculous. Probability would never have delivered us to this room this afternoon. Probability sculpted by loving intent has delivered us to this room this afternoon. Once you can sense that living intent and, make it an object of familiarity, that is the antidote to cultural paranoia and to the acceptance of your identity through imposed definitions by other people. And of course, psychedelics figure in here because they dissolve more dramatically and more effectively than anything else the cultural and linguistic and habitual assumptions that are masking that presence of Tao. It really is true, as the Bible says, you must become as a little child. That means you must become pre-culture. You must recover who you were before the engines of culture went to work on you and abused you and made you afraid and dumbed you down and distorted your values and so forth and so on. Yeah.
So, in a way, you're saying that feeding into culture.
Yeah, see, I think what's happened is at the top of the culture, it's profoundly intellectually bankrupt. There is no plan except to keep peddling stuff, basically until the forests are gone and the ocean's polluted, and this is not malevolent. It's not malevolent. It's simply they are clueless. They have run out of steam. And so the answer is to try and keep the game going as long as possible with daytime TV, with casino gambling, with lotteries, with endless distractions, with pop culture fads, with cults of celebrity, with spectacular trials and gory mass murders and endless circuses, while the people at the top are saying, sooner or later the shit is going to hit the fan. Sooner or later the dam will burst. And they say, well, let's make sure it's later, not sooner, because I've got 2 kids at the Sorbonne, I'm paying off a Mercedes, and I need to get this taken care of before it all falls apart. So in the absence of any cultural plan imposed from the top, this strange dynamic is happening. This has happened before in cultural history, where some huge enterprise like Christianity or patriarchy or something like that, after running its games for millennia, it just runs out of steam. And often there's nothing to rush in and fill the vacuum, nothing that is consciously engineered to do that. And so then in those situations, an actual creative bifurcation can take place, because what is about to happen is not in the hands of human managers. It lies deeper in the dynamics of the whole system. And we all feel, I think, this sense of excitement and the approach of the unimaginably new. And we don't know whether it's the aliens coming to pull our chestnuts out of the fire, or virtual reality, or a new drug, or a new style of sexual behaving, or star flight. We don't know what it is, but we can feel that it will transcend the categories of our managers, and they and we will then have to make sense of whatever this new reality is. And it terrifies some people, it liberates others. It's the same reality. Stephen Vincent Benet says something about, at the end of John Brown's Body, he says, when the prophets of strange religions bawl out their bizarre despair, do not join them on the mountain. Say only then, it is here. It is here. Because it is here. I mean, that was 1927 when he wrote that, and he spoke then of technology as our humble servant, already half a god. And that was in 1927. You can imagine then what that technology is today. Yeah, Mike? A manager class. I'd rather talk about a point in history where there's no more commodities. Yes, I don't think there will be a manager class. A manager class, you manage toward ideology. If we could transcend ideology, the way to manage society, I think, would be self-evident. The problem is trying to force it into the service of some kind of ideological vision. And then, of course, it becomes intractable, because no ideological vision we've ever had has been true to our humanness. The Christian version of what human beings are, the Nazi version, the Marxist version, the secular, market-oriented version, these all somehow insult various parts of our humanness. And so when an attempt is made to push us into these things, it doesn't work. And you get instead war, anxiety, and Q forces swamp the social system. I think the managing of society would be fairly simple in the absence of ideology. But we're addicted to ideology because somewhere along the line we've gotten the idea that you can't understand the world without an ideology, when in fact, ideologies are incredible impediments. No more bosses. Well, I suppose as long as we are disparate entities, there will be hierarchies of control. That seems obvious. But it seems as though we are playing with the idea that we may not be disparate entities, or that we may be only provisionally disparate entities. You know, we are a peculiar creature, somewhat, and we human beings, as a mass phenomenon, we're somewhat like a slime mold. We have a life cycle where part of our life cycle we appear to be completely separate individuals. But apparently in our, if you view our development over the past few centuries, we're entering into some aggregation phase, triggered by pheromones spread through technology. And we are beginning to create some kind of a superorganism. And the fear of some people is that once inside this superorganism, we will be forced into a permanent status as a sub-level of the hierarchy. In other words, you will have to give up your individuality and you will just become a kind of liver cell or brain cell or something in this organism. But I don't think this is the case. I think we have the unique ability to combine these two modes of existence. This is why we have this notion of society and the private reality of the individual. And probably in the domain of society, there will always be forms of, I don't want to say control, but management of the distribution of commodity. But the idea, I think, is to empower this other dimension, to spend as much time as possible in the individual free-swimming, free agent mode. In other words, not to see membership in society as a goal and a value to be conserved, but to see it as a necessary evil. You know, we need social organization, but in minimal doses. And when we go on a bender of addiction to social normative behaviors, then you get a psychic epidemic like National Socialism, where people voluntarily abandon their individuality to act in concert with some kind of mass impulse. This is extremely evolutionarily retrograde. It's not what we want to do. So I guess what I'm pleading for is an enlightened form of alienation, and not simply an emotionally driven alienation, but a strategically driven alienation. See, alienation can be used not to create neurosis, but to attain freedom. Creative alienation. Alienation that embraces itself as the source of inspiration. Nobody ever said it was going to be comfortable to be a human being and to ride one of these bipedal bodies from the cradle to the grave. I mean, it's an uncomfortable but I maintain manageable situation. But you have to have the lights on. You have to have your emotional responses in order, your intellectual responses in order. You have to have garnered some sense of how we got to this situation, and you have to have some sense of the tools available to transform it. Yeah. Well, it's certainly true that the human classroom is the most untransformed portion of society over the past 200 years. I mean, we basically still pass on our cultural values to our children the way it was done 200 or 300 years ago. This may be changing. Again, I don't mean to make the internet the panacea of all problems, but it seems to me here is a problem that the internet can address, and you don't have to be a technocrat to see how it has enormous power, because education is a process on one level of putting correct information in front of people. And in the present form of education, the great choke point is the limitations of human teachers, who, while as finely and nobly motivated as they are, inevitably they pass on their own limitations to their students. In the presence of the internet, this is somewhat mitigated, and there's a great leveling going on in the educational process. The quality of information available to all of us, if we learn how to make our way to it, is orders of magnitude more dependable than it was a generation ago. I mean, we have basically traded in cultural illusions for hard facts. Did you want to say something else?
Well, would you discuss because they are not functioning?
Well, yeah.
No longer function.
No, McLuhan talked about this. He talked about what he called electronic feudalism, and he said that the rise of electronic media would bring a retribalization of culture, and that the nation state would completely disappear. And I think this is happening. It won't disappear completely, but in the metaphor I made a few minutes ago, it will sort of take on the role of the church. It's largely irrelevant. Corporations now call the shots. Print, you see, has what are called hidden biases, and it allows and in fact makes inevitable certain kinds of ideas that once you get outside the domain of print conditioning, these ideas appear, if not absurd, then at least simply provisional. And what I'm thinking of is ideas such as the idea that all men, apologies to women, but all men are created equal. This is a faith of print-created society. There's absolutely no evidence that this is true. In fact, there's considerable evidence to the contrary. But the argument against not believing it is that if we don't believe this, we can't have social justice. So we must embrace an obviously preposterous idea in order to achieve social justice. Why is this preposterous idea so attractive? Well, it's because print is linear and uniform. Every lowercase e looks like every other lowercase e. Therefore, if the world of print is made out of these interchangeable and equally weighted entities, so must be the society that practices print culture. So we get the idea of one man, one vote. Another example, a different example, is assembly of objects out of interchangeable parts. Before print, if someone made an object, it was a unique object. The idea of an object, let's say a water wheel or something like that, where if it broke down, you got in touch with the company and they sent the part, and you then took out the bad part, put in the good part, and the pump merrily proceeds. That's a print-created idea, interchangeable parts. And so we begin to see that the conventions of the printer's shop become the conventions of an entire society, and how it does its politics and how it assembles its commodities are all dictated by the invisible assumptions of a form of media that nobody really looked at its potential effects before it was put in place. McLuhan saw that this kind of rational, linear, compartmentalized, uniformitarian culture would be completely broken up by electronics. And so it has come to pass. The great forms of print media are what are called one-to-many. A publisher publishes a book and many people read it. These one-to-many or top-down forms of media are perfect for controlling large numbers of people. You have the idea of the ministry of truth, where truth is something dispensed by governments and received with grateful upturned faces by bewildered citizenry that would otherwise apparently have no access to truth. This is madness talking. The new electronic media are what's called any-to-any. If I want to speak to you or I want to send email to you, that can be done. If you and I want to send email to 500 people, that can be done. Any-to-any communication is anti-hierarchical. There's no assumption of expertise or power or anything else as you ascend the pyramid of information transfer and dispersal. And so it's almost like the Wizard of Oz effect. Suddenly people say, you're not all powerful. You're not the wizard. You're a fat man in a stained overcoat pulling levers behind the scenes. And then the whole illusion drops away. The illusion of leaders, of privileged ideologies, of special forms of understanding. This is resisted by some people, usually control freaks, because they say, well, in the absence of these illusions, you would have chaos. Yes, indeed. The mother of all progress, the source of all innovation and creativity, the wind that blows the ship of paradigm shift, chaos. And the idea somehow that the human mind should interpose itself between society and this expression of chaos is just an illusion of control freaks.